Media Training 101, the mic is always hot. I know. I think we have one person on a coffee run, so we all know how important that is. There we go. Slide. All right. It's okay.
I understand there's a House seat vacancy over in Washington, but I don't want to speak of the House. There's your opportunity to do that.
So, all right. Well, good morning. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It is 10 o'clock, and we'll get started. Just for those of you that I have not had a chance to meet directly, I'm Stacy Deneau, and I'm the CEO here at 180 Place, and we are very grateful for you all that have gathered here for this forum that we believe is important and very sort of tightly focused. Just as a reminder, for those of you that might be watching this at a later date via our YouTube channel, it is October 4th at 10 o'clock in the morning, and these are the candidates for the City of Charleston Mayor's race. And we are, for those of you in the room, we are recording this for play back later. We'll be circulating the link so that you can share that. There is limited space in this room, so we thank you for those that have joined us, but recording this and airing it later we feel is a necessary step to really help convey to a broader audience the issue of homelessness and how these candidates, one of whom will be our mayor, plan to address that issue. So we have with us facilitating today Forrest Alton, who is founder and president of 1,000 Feathers. And just to make it clear how fair and balanced we want this forum to be, bad phrase probably, Forrest lives in Memphis, Tennessee. So he is definitely a neutral party, but really knows the issue of homelessness and affordable housing and knows this community well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Forrest, and we will jump right in.
Thank you, Stacy, and good morning again. It is my great pleasure to be here with all of you today. Thank you to Stacy and the leadership at 180 Place for inviting me to moderate this forum. And most importantly, thank you to each of you, all of the candidates, for saying yes and also joining us this morning. This is certainly not the first time you all have been at a forum together, but perhaps the first focus solely on this critical issue of homelessness and the extension to affordable housing. We chose to call this a forum rather than a debate for a few reasons, and I think I'll walk through those this morning. Number one, we will stay focused on a single issue or set of issues. Number two, we want to give all of you equal time and equal opportunity to express your positions. So every candidate will have the opportunity to answer every question. And then number three, all of the candidates were sent a list of potential questions in advance of this forum. We hope that this format will keep us all focused on the issues this morning rather than on each other. And so a few rules to help us along the way. First, we'll ask that after a 1-minute opening statement, that you keep the rest of your answers to 90 seconds. We have 2 timekeepers in the front of the room who are here with a single responsibility to keep you and me on track and on time. So we ask that you will follow their cues. I certainly will be. As the moderator, I will use my discretion to allow for a 30-second response anytime someone is called out by name. But again, we hope that this format today will allow us to stay focused on the issues rather than on each other. Finally, I should say that we, prior to this event, randomly drew names, not just for who would go first on each question, but actually the order for each question. So I will call on each of you individually after we ask questions and allow for your 90-second response. With that, let's get started. As I mentioned, we're going to ask all of you to start with a 1-minute opening statement. So if each of you could take that 1 minute, and as part of your opening, if you're so inclined, we would also love to hear how you will measure your personal success, the success of your tenure as mayor as it relates to addressing homelessness and affordable housing. As I said, we randomly drew order before the event started. Candidate Shahid, we'll start with you.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning. And quite frankly, this issue is a very sensitive issue that I don't think our community has addressed adequately over time. And as I was thinking about my remarks this morning, I had to go back into a little bit of history when the first time I encountered what we called back then street people and bums. And I hope that we have come a long way from that designation of folks, and that we have educated ourselves and are willing to address this issue with a sense of love and a sense of humanity. I don't think we've come far enough along those lines, and there's so much work that we need to do to be addressing homelessness and affordable housing. And as your mayor, I pledge to you that I would make this a top priority to make sure that we're addressing this with full transparency and honesty, and tackling this issue and not hiding from it. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Cogswell.
Yeah, thank you all for having us here today to talk about this very critical issue. It's a big part of my platform in the sense that the affordability that we have here, the lack thereof, which also compounds the homelessness crisis we have, is a major problem, because what we have is a region that's growing, but the proverbial rising tide is not lifting all boats. I've been in the real estate business. My wife, Lucille, who's here, we're partners. We've done a lot of redevelopment opportunities, but we also built the first workforce housing project in the city of Charleston. I've also been in the state legislature, and I understand how the funding mechanisms work or don't work. And that's a skill set, I think, or an experience that is going to be invaluable to figuring out how to address this issue. In terms of what I'd like to get accomplished, pretty straightforward. I think it would be pretty easy to triple the amount of affordable housing units that have been delivered over the past 8 years in 4 years. So that's an initiative that I would put forth, and look forward to discussing it more this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Gammons.
Good morning. It's so good to see everyone here today and addressing this issue of those who do not have the ability or do not have the resources in order to call someplace home. And I'm so grateful to 180 Place and all the board members for what you do. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing law since 1992. I am a law professor. I've been at Charleston School of Law since 2009. And throughout my life, I've worked for equality and fairness for everyone, and making sure people have the proper resources in order to have a well life. And as mayor, I will be focused on this issue and making sure we have homes, giving as much as we can to 180 Place, and making sure we see everyone who is in our eyesight, who is out on the streets, who need our help and who need our support.
Thank you. Candidate Tecklenburg.
I believe that helping those most in need in our community is how we will be judged by the end of the day. I was honored to serve as president of Crisis Ministries back in the 90s. This issue is dear to my heart. The city of Charleston is now devoting more resources to addressing homelessness than we ever have before. I did form the Mayor's Council on Homelessness, and I made it plural, involving Mount Pleasant, Charleston, and Somerville, because this is a regional issue, y'all. It's not just the city of Charleston. And I'll be speaking more about our Hope Center, which is a complement to what 180 and other providers do in the community. And I'm so excited that soon we'll be breaking ground on a permanent city-owned facility, the Permanent Hope Center, to serve those who are in need in our community.
Thank you. Candidate Gadsden.
Good morning. Name is Mika Gadsden. I like to introduce myself as the daughter of Jim Crow refugees. And what that means is that both my mother and my father, a native of Wadmalaw Island, my mother a native of Eastern North Carolina, they left the Jim Crow South in pursuit of better opportunities, economic opportunities up north in New Jersey where I was born. I am part of what was considered a reverse migration. I returned to Charleston, even though I am a Charleston County school district graduate. I returned to Charleston because I wanted to make this place my home. Success for me would look like eradicating houselessness at the root. Success for me would look like, you are all wonderful people here at 180, but it would look like putting you all out of business. And we need to work toward that. And hopefully I can articulate my vision and my plans for Charleston with the questions.
Thank you. Candidate Middleton.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you again for this opportunity to have a focused discussion about this topic. Born and raised right here in the city of Charleston, a place called Bayside Manor. Graduated from Burke and the Citadel, have been in the South Carolina Army National Guard for 23 years, currently a lieutenant colonel serving as a battalion commander. Worked for Congressman Jim Clyburn for a number of years, and I think for me, certainly Crisis Ministries 180 Place is not what it used to be when my grand aunt Joan occupied this space for a few weeks in the 90s. This is not the same place that it once was when I grew up, and will walk back and forth in this entire area. So we've seen progress made, but still there are people that we, in plain day sight, are not addressing their deepest concerns and giving them the ladders of opportunity to be successful, to reach their God-given potential. So for me, when I joined the military, there's a phrase that I will not leave a fallen comrade behind in the soldier's creed that I talk about often. And as mayor of the city of Charleston, I would do everything in my power not to leave any neighborhood, community, or resident behind. That includes those without a permanent address. I served on the U.S. Interagency Council for Homelessness when I worked in the Obama administration. So there's some deep things that I hope to discuss today in terms of what success will look like if the good people of Charleston elect me as mayor. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you, mostly for modeling what stopping at 1 minute looks like.
Getting good at this.
That was excellent. You are getting good at this. We will do you a little favor and extend our time to 90 seconds for this next series of questions. And this question, we will start with candidate Middleton. Homelessness in any community is a multifaceted, complex problem. Here in Charleston, those complexities include historical injustices that go back generations, as well as issues of racial and social inequity. As one example, according to the U.S. Census, the population of this city is 20% African American, yet African Americans represent more than 50% of the homeless population, according to our community's homeless information database. What do you see as realistic solutions to these types of systemic and complex issues that you could implement even in just a single term?
There are a number of things that I would do as mayor, and some of that is always focused on data. In God we trust, also data we need. So as it relates to that, we have to make sure that those that are experiencing chronic homelessness and those that are experiencing this, whether they are adults, whether they are seniors, whether they are youth, are part of the decision-making process, a part of the solution, a part of the conversation, so that we hear directly from those affected by this. We can be all up here and say this needs to happen, that needs to happen, but my military training tells me, how do we operationalize this? Are there unintended consequences that have taken place because of things that we have put forth? So I think having an Office of Financial Empowerment is something that we can do. Many cities are doing that now in order to provide tools to prevent homelessness, but also to prevent more economic opportunity for individuals. I think looking at a guaranteed income is another thing that we could attempt to do in certain parts of the city of Charleston. And again, making sure that we prevent homelessness, especially chronic homelessness, but that we have these strategic alliances that are needed, especially when it comes to the resources, not just on the government side, but the private sector side as well. So those are some of the things that I would do as mayor of the city of Charleston.
Thank
Right
you.
on cue. That was pretty good, man. That's wow.
Once you turn it over, you better stop.
I should have also mentioned in the beginning, there's certainly no penalty for finishing early. Candidate Gammons.
When looking at this issue and people without the resources in our history in Charleston, the city of Charleston, is multi-layered, and we have to talk about enslaved people, we have to talk about natives who were displaced, and then also the gentrification and displacement that has happened, particularly in the peninsula on Johns Island and James Island too. So we have to take all of that into account. So what can I do? And working with City Council as mayor, what I will do is certainly work with 180 Place and finding out what is needed and working with you to give you everything that you need. And also, we know in the past that black and brown people were denied loans when they went to seek a mortgage to get a home. So we need to work with businesses, and I will work with these different businesses and banks to ensure that there is this fairness across the board for everyone who is applying for a loan. And then when you look across our city, we have vacant buildings. And I will look at those vacant buildings and determine what can we do with them. Let us purchase them. The city can use its constitutional power and purchase vacant buildings and use those as places for people without the resources and the ability to have their own home where they can live.
Candidate Cogswell.
First, I'd say that working very closely with your organization would be a top priority because you're the experts. You know what's going on. You've been on the ground. You've seen it. You've been there, lived it. And it's a very impressive track record. I wouldn't, as much as I think the Hope Center is well intended, I wouldn't get into trying to complement the efforts. I would be more supportive directly of programs like 180 Place. In terms of broader picture, I've been pretty clear, particularly when it comes to housing, which again, as I think is a major root cause, that we need a regional housing authority. What we have right now, the city having one, the county having one, North Charleston having one, I mean, it's very dysfunctional and they're all competing for the same funds. I'd also believe that, and you all know this, the low-income housing state tax credit is a mess and needs to be completely revamped, but you're not going to get that just as the city of Charleston asking the state legislature for that. You need to work with the city of Greenville. You need to work with Columbia to have a collective effort there, and that can be done in 4 years too. And the last thing I'll point out is working with the school board and the county to do a millage cap or property tax cap on long-time owner-occupied residents, particularly lower income neighborhoods, because that is what is causing the gentrification. When property taxes all around these historically black neighborhoods go up, property taxes, they're priced out. So I think that's a good solution to help solve this critical issue. Thank you.
Candidate Gadsden, and given that there's been a little space, I'll go ahead and repeat the question.
I was going to ask anyway. Go ahead.
Homelessness in any community is a multifaceted, complex problem. What do you see as realistic solutions to this type of systemic and complex issue that you could implement even in a single term?
Short answer to that is that we need to introduce bold progressive legislation that looks like establishing a social housing authority, which is a little bit different from what has been suggested. But I want to take a step back and say that where we are currently, right now with regard to housing insecurity or even the disparities that African American and Gullah folks experience, that is actually a policy objective. Now, no one at this table is to blame for that. This predates current leadership. But this was a policy objective to displace African American residents and replace them with white residents is literally articulated from as early as the 30s to 40s. We've seen that from mayors like Mayor Lockwood, Mayor Maybank. So what we're dealing with now, we're dealing with the vestiges of that former policy practice. You cannot treat the issue if you cannot diagnose the issue. We need to reprioritize making housing accessible for everyone And I believe that starts with a social housing authority, which also gets us in the mind frame of not just building single-family homes, but more community-driven housing solutions.
Thank you. Candidate Tecklenburg.
So thank you, Forrest, and everyone. And yes, the issue of homelessness can be very complex. I would say that the goal is to achieve zero homelessness. What that means is not that there's not a homeless person on the street or someone becoming homeless, but that you have the resources in place to assist those when that stream of homelessness occurs. And what are the strategies to accomplish that? One is housing first. Always try to get someone into housing. We found out when we addressed Tent City, right when I got elected mayor, and there were hundreds of people living in tents under the interstate. If we could get folks into housing first, then we could address those other issues. For the unhoused, having those wraparound services available to help them to get to housing. Most folks who are experiencing homelessness have some other issue going on, either medical, mental, addiction, and so addressing those issues with each individual really makes a difference to be able to get them housed. So that's why we support 180 Place and what they're doing. That's exactly what they do here. That's what we do down the street at the Hope Center that we founded here in the city of Charleston, because you need multiple resources and service providers doing this work. Everybody isn't going to come to 180 Place. Everybody isn't going to come to the Hope Center. But all together, combining these resources, we can put those strategies in place.
Thank you. Candidate Shahid.
Thank you. I graduated from law school in 1981 and got sworn in November of 1981. And my first professional job was working as an assistant Charleston County Public Defender. And my first two cases that were assigned to me dealt directly with homelessness. So my early professional career, this has been an issue that I've been looking at and trying to understand and tackle. My two clients who were appointed to me were arrested for being in a state of homelessness, and they made it into a criminal act. And your question about the injustices about that were very blatant to me from the very beginning. Somebody broke into an abandoned trailer because he just wanted a place to sleep. And the police arrested him and charged him with, back then, housebreaking. We have come a long way from that type of mindset, but there were very long instances in clients that I represented who were facing criminal charges because of they didn't have a place to live. And that's wrong. And I know we have, in the city of Charleston, we have a homeless court, in municipal court. But it is a top-to-down issue that we need to be addressing for folks because of the varied issues that accompany homelessness, which it may be a mental health disorder, a addiction to drugs or alcohol, or some other long-term problems that we need to be addressing from top to bottom.
Thank you. Candidate Gammons, we'll begin with you for this question. We are very thankful again to 180 Place for hosting this event in their beautiful facility. As we sit here on Upper Meeting Street, we can quite literally look out the window and see economic development and urban renewal happening in real time. At the same time, we know the impact of gentrification on the city's most vulnerable residents. We also know that even among the working, low-wage jobs and food preparation and service, office and administrative support, sales and transportation are, according to the Chamber of Commerce, some of the most commonly held occupations in this region. As mayor, how do you plan to ensure that economic development does not negatively impact housing availability and affordability for all?
Economic development and community development needs to be working hand in hand and having those offices work together. And that's what I will do as mayor. So when we're looking at what can be approved economically, we also have to bring in the community. And I've said before that I will have this mayor's advisory force with representatives from each of the area, the downtown, the peninsula, James Island, Johns Island, Daniel Island, and yes, I got all 5 of that. West of Ashley. And with this group, bringing everybody to the table and listening to them to get their ideas. And when we think about those who are displaced and the gentrification that has happened, I mentioned to you earlier about the Black people predominantly being here in the peninsula and the islands, and that they're no longer there. So working with everyone to ensure that we are looking out for everyone, and that when we're dealing with development, we have overdevelopment. When we're dealing with this, amending our zoning laws and reaching them and making sure there is no there are height restrictions and that everyone has access to the river, the marshes, and the creeks. Also with that, with those amendments, paying attention to what is around us. And I love what 180 Place said, looking at the houses that were around, and we're not going to build this 10-story building.
Thank you. Candidate Tecklenburg.
So if you look up and down Upper Meeting Street, most of the urban renewal, as you mentioned, and new development has occurred on either vacant or underutilized commercial properties. No one has been technically, like the building right across the street that just got built was, I think, a cabinet repair shop. But we have to reserve and conserve every piece of real estate that we can for affordable housing. And that's why right around the corner, the city is building James Lewis Apartments. About 60 units going to open first quarter next year. It's why we supported the Humanities Foundation in their renovation of Archer School, which is providing about 90 units of affordable housing just a block away from here. It's why when we bought the Low Line, I reserved about an acre of property that's not in the direct path of where the bike ped path will go for an affordable housing development of about 50 units. So we have to look and be careful about every piece of real estate we can get our hands on to create more affordable housing. And then when you do that, you have to reserve a certain percentage of the units for very low income citizens. And we're doing just that at all of those locations, and including the one that we bought up on Cunnington Avenue, which will be right next door to the permanent Hope Center that I mentioned, I hope to talk more about. And we're going to build 90 units of affordable housing there, and we're supporting 180. So we just got to look all hands on deck at every piece of property that we can possibly put more affordable housing on.
Thank you. Candidate Gadsden.
When it comes to the economy, Charleston has a booming real estate economy. Charleston has a booming tourism economy. What we don't have is a booming care economy. We need to create economic opportunities that everyone can take advantage of. We can look to other municipalities like Cleveland, where you have where the city has sponsored worker-led, worker-managed co-op, worker-owned co-ops, right? So what do they do there? Well, they provide a very essential service to some of the institutions within the city. So what would it look like to have worker-led co-ops here where folks can earn competitive wages and also own a bit of that industry by servicing our hospitals and our hotels? We can do that here. The other thing I'd like to mention is that we need to empower local businesses to do better by their workforce. So that means offering living wages and then certifying these companies. They offer living wages, that they offer things like childcare. We need to start lifting up and promoting and amplifying businesses that are making the material conditions for our residents better. This will help work in concert with things like upzoning and making sure that our land use policy construction looks more equitable and open for all. I'll leave that there.
Thank you. Candidate Shahid, again, I'll repeat the question here at the halfway mark. As mayor, how do you plan to ensure that economic development does not negatively impact housing availability and affordability for all?
So there's no question that as the peninsula's become a more popular place to visit, and folks are moving into these areas that were once places that people would not move into, and let's just be honest with us about that. And so there's gentrification of housing, and long-time residents has been a chronic problem in the city. Now, I just remember other candidates who ran for political office were ringing that bell back in the late 80s and the early 90s about what we were doing with our growth and our tourism growth that had created such a epidemic problem for that. One of the things we can do is very simple, is that, and I hosted this when I was the president of the Charleston County Bar Association, is a clinic to ensure that people who own their own homes now, and we can protect them, that you do very simple things. You create a will to make sure that there's a very simple succession plan in place to protect the homeowners that have their property, and that they're able to protect it and not lose it when a loved one dies and the house goes into some type of legal disarray. So you do that very first. The second thing is that you do start addressing zoning issues to ensure that pockets of property that become available on the open market are designated for residential uses only. The peninsula population was condensed to over 50,000 people at one point. We're down to a very fraction of that number. So zoning would be a huge issue that I want to put in place to protect those residential communities.
Thank you. Candidate Middleton.
When I was a boy, my mother used to always say, son, when you are sleeping, they are thinking, they are working, they are planning. I never knew what she meant by that then, but as I got older, I understood exactly what she was saying, which is why my work ethic is embedded in doing a lot of the hard work, headway over headline. And I think as a city, when planning happens, you plan 10, 20, 30 years down the line. And you have things in place because of real estate, because of development. And for us, I'm all for economic development, but I prefer equitable economic development. Not as a tagline, but as a normal practice. And things that I would do as mayor would focus on having a first right of refusal. So if you have that individual that's living in homes now and the owner decides to sell, that they have to offer that home ownership to that person that lives there. And then a trusted nonprofit could buy that home, and it could still be affordable, or maybe that family can do the same thing. The other thing I would do as it relates to development is these other effects that happen. So having a stay put initiative would allow for those that live in that home to stay in that home because of the property tax. When I lived in Rosemont and development was going to happen there, that was one concept that was presented. It never happened, but it needs to happen, and that's one of the, I'll be respectful and stop.
Thank you. Candidate Cogswell.
Sure. Again, I said earlier the proverbial rising tide in terms of our economic and diverse economy that we have here in the region is not lifting all boats. We need to do better because I do believe, as Mika pointed out, that we have a very unique DNA, and we need to make sure, and that includes all socioeconomic classes. We need to make sure that we are a living city and protect that. I talked about the millage cap or the property tax cap on longtime residents. I think that's a very pragmatic way of moving forward. But I also talk about the housing authority, and I talked about mentioning that we need to have a regional housing authority. One of the largest landowners in the city of Charleston is the housing authority, and you have a housing stock that frankly was built during segregation and is not very efficient in terms of its density. And frankly, it's in terrible shape. Just read the articles about Gadsden Green. I went and sat with a woman that's lived there for 20 years 2 days ago in her apartment. There was mold everywhere, and she has asthma. I mean, it's totally unacceptable. So we need to address that pretty head on. And I think, too, I'll wrap up by saying that, we need, again, to work pretty closely with organizations like 180 Place, because you all are the boots on the ground. You all are the experts. The city doesn't need to be involved in trying to duplicate your efforts. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call a quick audible here and ask each of you to follow up on this question just a touch, and we'll go back through in the same order with maybe 1 minute. And let's take the focus off of development for a second and put it squarely on families. Many individuals and families in Charleston are, quite frankly, one emergency away from homelessness. What measures and strategies could you propose as mayor to provide preventative assistance and support for those at risk of becoming homeless? Candidate Gammons.
It's so important as the mayor that she will work with other organizations and other governments, looking at it from a state perspective, a county perspective, and also a federal perspective. We have veterans in this area, that can be placed on the streets, and they are. We have females who have been abused. And so what we need to do is have, along with community development, economic development, have the ability to give those individuals resources in order to help them. And that's the way that we can provide this particular change and bring hope to those who are so close to being in a predicament where they don't have the resources in order to remain in their homes.
Candidate Tecklenburg.
So there are a lot of service providers out there providing various assistance. 180, our own Hope Center, South Carolina Origin. Part of the job of the Mayor's Commission has been to try to coordinate amongst all the service providers so everybody knows what everybody else is doing. So when someone's at risk or first becomes homeless, we can provide the resources to help them stay in their place or get a new place if they need to. And we're always looking for new things that better coordinate. We met this young lady from Nashville, Lizzie Goddard. She started this program out there that we're replicating in Charleston, in concert with the city and the county and other providers, and actually Neighbors Together up in North Charleston is going to be the main coordinator here, where you provide some incentive and security to landlords to provide more low-income rental units to those who need them right away.
Thank you.
I could go on. Thank you.
Candidate Gadsden.
As the only renter on the stage, I'm going to be a little candid with you. During the pandemic, I was gainfully employed. I'm a media entrepreneur, so sometimes that means contracts come and go and payment can be precarious. I found myself in need of assistance at one moment. I currently pay $1,600 for my studio apartment in West Ashley, which is egregious. What would have helped me at that moment would have been seeing the city or the county provide access to resources that were being promoted from the state level or from the federal level. I could not access, as tech savvy as I am, as astute as I am, I could not access necessary funds to help float me between one month to the other. So we need to remove barriers to what exists. A lot of folks don't know about the first-time home buyers programs that the city has. A lot of folks don't know about a lot of programs that the city sponsors, good work that the city does. We need to remove those barriers to some of that relief and do away with some of the bureaucracy and red tape that's there.
Thank you. Candidate Shahid.
So the first issue is at-risk folks who are a been away from becoming into a state of homelessness. So the first issue is addressing that. And what you would want to do is first to help identify and put into place a process of identifying who are the most vulnerable, who are at risk. And you think about what we have available with the interaction that we have with various city employees. And so one thing I would do would be to empower them to some level as they come in contact with citizens, is to identify these are the folks who may be at risk. And it's not very hard to do that. The second thing is just simply to expand the level of services that the city has in place already. And so when those families become to that level at risk, that we have the funding and programs in place to address that at a more thorough and more expansive attitude. And we're just not doing that well enough now. And I think we have the opportunity to take care of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Middleton.
Information is power. And just because we with a full-time job, we in an office, we with a house, we with a car, have all this information does not mean those that need to benefit from it know about it. That has to be 365, not seasonal. We should not ration out progress, and we should not ration out information. People have to get it every single day in multiple ways, whether that is through having faith-based neighborhood partnerships, which is something I would do as mayor. Again, having an Office of Financial Empowerment is another, coordinating with services in and out of season, and those on the ground. Street team, street committee, every single day providing information and services so we can coordinate better. Models exist in other parts of the country. It's some of what I do in my 9-to-5 job and have done throughout my time in public service, and I would do that as mayor of the city of Charleston. That is how we get the information in the hands, so it is accessible, it is affordable, and it makes a difference.
Thank you. Candidate Cogswell.
Sure. Everyone up here today on this question has talked about how difficult it is, how confusing it is, and I think it is. It's incredibly inefficient in terms of our efforts to address homelessness and affordable housing. And I think that is a problem in and of itself. You have a lot of different groups that, however well-intended, are competing for the same funds, writing for the same grants. And again, folks, there's just a lot of inefficiencies, and you're seeing limited progress forward as a result of that. So I think we do need to consolidate. I think government is not the answer. It is certainly part of the answer, but it is not the answer. And again, I go back to, and I know I'm sounding like a broken record, it's not just because I'm here at 180 Place, but I do think you have an organization that has done an incredible job in addressing this issue for decades now. And I would look to work with groups like 180 Place and broaden that mission versus trying to do these things that are competitive in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Tecklenburg, this question will start with you. Affordability is a word we've heard a number of times already, not just today, but throughout all of your campaigns. According to the City of Charleston's own city plan, the city needs an estimated more than 16,000 additional affordable units by 2030 in order to eliminate the affordability gap. There are currently only roughly 1,000 proposed units in active development. What strategy should the next mayor be prioritizing to help shrink this gap? And we'll appreciate all of you being as specific as possible.
Sure. So while we invest and partner with other folks to create as many of those units as we can, we fully realize it's government can't do this alone. We need to partner with the private sector. We provide incentives for density. That's through our mixed-use zoning that allows developers to have a few more units as long as they provide a certain percentage of affordable units. We're working with Charleston County to also, for the first time, provide a property tax incentive for affordable housing in Charleston County. So we do it with partners. We've invested about $50 million in the last few years in some of those developments that I mentioned, like Archer School, James Lewis Apartments, even the one here at 180 Place, that the city invested $3 million of our own funds and also helped allocate $3 million from the Climb Fund. It's a total of $6 million to go to the development that's going to be built right out here in front of 180, part of the 180 development. I think they're going to provide 70 units. I'm going to run out of time, but there's the low-line development. And by the way, it's West Ashley, Johns Island. We're buying some property on Bees Ferry Road for affordable housing. We're buying property, we've already bought property, getting ready to develop on Johns Island, West Ashley. So we have hundreds of units literally that we built and are partnering with others to build, but it's not enough. We need to partner with the region and with private development as well.
Thank you. Candidate Shahid.
the city has a dismal record of providing affordable housing in the past 8 years or so. We passed a $20 million bond, one of the first acts that came up for a referendum in front of the city. And of that, I forgot the exact number, but I think someplace close to 500 units. I traveled to Greenville earlier this year. They have a wonderful track record of adding 500 units a year. So the past 3 years, they have 1,500 units that they added to their inventory over that time frame. And very simple, what they did was they just partnered with the private sector and with the government to provide more increased housing available to their communities, and they've been widely successful. When we have a plan, we have to keep in mind some very simple principles. Affordable housing needs to be in an area where there is access to transportation. Affordable housing needs to be in an area in which they have access to a grocery store, access to school. I traveled to on one of our national conferences we had several years ago to Los Angeles with this as a chronic issue. And that's exactly what they did. And one of the ways that they're tackling this issue is to make sure they build affordable housing units that are close to all of those components: transportation, school, grocery stores, even recreational areas. And we don't have a comprehensive plan to address that with those principles in mind.
Thank you. Candidate Gammons.
We need to work together. We need this collaboration with the city, with the county, with the state, and with federal government. 16,000 units in 7 years. That seems like this broad and amazing goal, yet it can be done. I was assistant city attorney in Greenville, and part of that renovation of Greenville occurred when I was with the city. And what they did, Knox White as mayor and city council, is working with these private organizations and groups. So having and creating these public-private relationships is key. Focusing on the businesses, banks that give loans, and encouraging them to provide loans and financial resources is key. And also working with, again, community development and economic development. Having this joint office, this joint department working together is key. We have vacant buildings in all areas of our city that can be utilized, that can be used. And that's one thing the city of Greenville did too, in purchasing those buildings and renovating those buildings, and helping those who do not have the funds, who own the buildings, who own their homes, who do not have the funds in order to repair that. So that's what I will do as mayor, is working in this collaborative effort to help everyone.
Thank you. Candidate Middleton.
We have to do some of the non-sexy things. Okay, so I wrote these things down, and forgive me for just rattling them off based on the time we have allotted. But it all depends on not how much units you build, but how many units have been permitted. If you permit 500 or 1,000 every year, then that means you're actually working towards getting them built. That means you actually have the resources and the financing in place from both the government side, but also the private sector side, especially with banks and how they are using their community reinvestment dollars to provide in areas that they are in. So whether that is an eviction prevention program that we'll do in the city of Charleston, fair housing, a tenant bill of rights, actually applying for $500,000 for a planning grant from HUD on the choice neighborhoods, which also leads to a $50 million grant from HUD to do mixed use housing as it relates to various areas. So you have transportation, so you have schools, so you have grocery stores, all of the infrastructure that's needed in place to do that. $50 million choice neighborhoods from HUD. Other communities are doing this. We're not doing it here. Scale what works, whether that is the HUD VASH program, Section 8 housing, low-income tax credit, home investment partnership, emergency solutions. We as a city did not utilize the ARPA funds nearly enough to prevent homelessness and to provide more housing in the city of Charleston.
Thank you.
Sorry for that.
Candidate Gadsden.
Yeah, I'm encouraged by the momentum, or rather the interest in building affordable housing, not just locally at the county level, but also throughout the state. We see areas like Greenville and Spartanburg kind of leading the way on that. I want to say this, though, before I go into what we could be doing. I want to be careful when we suggest that we throw out public-private partnerships so easily. We have to keep people and taxpayers in mind when we talk about public-private partnerships. When it comes to cost overruns and accountability and transparency, I do tend to believe that taxpayers are usually left holding the short end of the stick. But with regard to affordable housing options and what we can do to make sure that folks earning 50% of the area median income as opposed to 80 to 120%, which is most popular here in Charleston, we have to pull every lever at our disposal. Like I said earlier, the county is working very hard to do things like work with the new funds that will come from the accommodation tax legislation changes. Also, things like offering the special source revenue credit to certain developers. We need to start wooing small-scale, incremental developers to Charleston. We have not done that. We hear a lot about public housing in Section 8. Social housing, to me, is a way forward. People's opinions about public housing, it's not the public housing of the past. It's not Cabrini Green or even Gadsden Green. We can move forward with social housing and public housing options that are modern, and other cities are doing that right now.
Thank you. Candidate Cogswell.
Yeah, what we are doing right now is not working at all. The incentives that we're providing to developers, ladies and gentlemen, is not working. Just because you can do something or you're permitted to do something doesn't mean that it's going to happen. So when you look at the actual record, as Councilman Shahid pointed out, we did a $20 million bond. We've delivered a little over 500 units in 8 years. That, again, is not getting the job done. So you need to be realistic about this stuff. I think there are ways to do public-private partnerships. I'm actually a lot more bullish on that than some of the other folks up here. I do think that money is certainly an issue, but you need to look at that regionally, as I pointed out. A lot of this federal funding comes through the state, and it's a very dysfunctional system. As I think you here at 180 Place trying to get the money from the state right now for your project. I mean, how long has it been going on? 7 years at this point from initial design? That is unacceptable. I mean, look how many market rate units have been built. There are ways to do it, folks. I mean, the RAD program is a good first step. Again, I go back to the public housing that we have here. That needs to be completely revamped, and you have a federal program like the RAD program that needs to be aggressively used. We've been talking a lot about it, but you haven't seen any real action to date. So that would change with me, I can assure you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm keeping an eye on the clock and also the list of 47 additional questions that I'd love to ask each of you. Let's shrink here to 1 minute as a quick follow-up to what we just discussed. We'll do one last question and then also ask you all to take some time in a closing statement. But so 1 minute on this final question. Candidate Cogswell, we'll start with you, and this question is sort of where you ended your last remarks. Most, if not all of the strategies this group of candidates has proposed in our conversation today require significant resources. Yet funding is often a challenge when it comes to addressing homelessness and affordable housing. That is the reality. How will you secure and allocate necessary funding to support all of these ideas we've heard today?
Again, I go back to, I do think there's actually a lot of funding. It's just not been efficiently solicited, and there's a lot of competition, frankly. Again, well-intended, but there's a lot of competition, and as a result, you don't have a lot of forward progress. So one thing that I think is absolutely critical is the low-income housing tax credit and our structure in the state. We're one of the worst in the entire country in terms of how that program is administered and what the value of it is. That needs to change, but as I said earlier, Charleston isn't going to be able to do it. You got to get Greenville, you got to get Columbia, you got to go to the state legislature with a clear plan to make it change, and you need to whip those votes in those other cities because they have the same problem. Granted, they're doing a lot better job of it than we are right now. And so, again, it's going to take a collaborative approach, but the good news is, folks, there are ways forward. There are pragmatic ways forward, and I'm excited to bring those to the mayor's office. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Tecklenburg.
So there's the immediate needs of helping those who are experiencing homelessness. So that's one effort. We've pulled together at the city our own funding. We're using ARPA funding. We've been helping raise money from the charitable philanthropic community. We started a Homeless to Hope Fund to help address those needs of folks who are experiencing homelessness. We've put together about $6.8 million, by the way, to build this permanent Hope Center. We've been operating a Hope Center for ever since Tent City, about a year after Tent City because of needs. I wish I had some more time to tell you all about the good things we're doing on the street, providing showers, laundry, providing wraparound services for our citizens who are experiencing homelessness so that we can help them get into housing and take care of those immediate needs. We have stepped up to the plate and provided city resources. We had 2 outreach workers. We've just gotten a grant to get 2 more. We're out there on the street helping people every day.
Thank you. Candidate Gadsden.
I joked earlier about, putting 180 Place out of business, and of course I wasn't being completely literal. But we do need to focus more on long-term solutions that lead to permanent rehousing of the houseless or the housing insecure. 1 in 4 Charlestonians are housing insecure. We have to get to the root of that. Charleston is becoming an increasingly, or is, an unaffordable place to live. It's inaccessible. No one on this panel feels the urgency more than me as a renter. We need to make sure that we start prioritizing solutions that meet the inequity at the root. We need to offer better wages. We need to incentivize businesses to offer better wages so that folks can afford to live where they want to live.
Candidate Middleton.
I'll repeat the question.
I am happy to. How will you secure and allocate necessary funding to support all of these ideas?
Lines of effort for this is multifaceted, and it cannot be stop and go. It has to be consistent in and out of season. And having worked in this space for a long time and having relationships at every level of government, one of the things that I would do as mayor is certainly look at what other cities are doing. And the examples that I talked about earlier and will continue to talk about is what I would do as mayor. Again, resources from the private sector would come from banks, would come from philanthropic organization, and it's having those strategic alliances to say, here's what we can do in the city of Charleston. Choice neighborhoods, we haven't gotten the $50 million for it because we hadn't applied for it. There are other resources that we just have not applied for. I know this for a fact, not an opinion, because I have clients of other cities across the country that have applied, that we have worked with them, that we worked with federal government, state government, local government to get them what we are trying to get here in Charleston.
Thank you. Candidate Shahid.
So the very first question you ask yourself is, what singular or multi-events have occurred in the past 10 years, 20 years, 30 years to get us to the point that we are right now? And it's been our own success. And I never heard this term before or used it before until getting on city council, but unintended consequences. And it took me a little while to understand exactly what that meant. But our tourism industry has had a wonderful impact economically on our community. But the negative impact of that has created this issue that we're dealing with. So the sources of that money, hospitality and accommodations tax, our hands are tied in city government from using those types of resources. We get to use a certain percentage of that money that comes in, but freeing up that money more provides a very available avenue of sources of income and money to address and help fund, and that would be an immediate source of income that we could use to address a lot of these issues.
Thank you. Candidate Gammons.
It goes back to collaboration. It goes back to reaching to all these different levels of government in order to resolve this issue. City, county, state, and federal. And we can do that, and I will do that as mayor. And looking at, again, these resources that are available, they're here. We live in a very wealthy country, a fantastic country. So the resources are there. And as mayor, I will reach out and get those resources, get that funding, and bring it to our city. Working with the banks, working with these private-public relationships, having those done, and also working with healthcare, working with physicians, asking them, encouraging them to help those who are in critical need of services. So working with families and businesses, with neighborhoods, all the neighborhoods, in order to provide those necessary resources. That's what I will do.
Thank you. Take a chance here that this blinking light doesn't mean the lights and cameras are going to go off exactly at 11 a.m. here, and clear just a little space for each of you to offer a closing statement. 1 minute, please. And for this final closing statement, we will go in good old-fashioned alphabetical order. So we'll start here with you, Candidate Cogswell, and work our way down the table. Thank you.
Sure. Well, again, thank you all for having us. It's been a great discussion. One of the reasons that I'm really excited about running for mayor, and hopefully if you see it fit to being your mayor, is that I think local government can do really great things. I think that it provides, in essence, a laboratory for good government policy because, frankly, you need to get 6 people to agree with you, and you can try different things. And if they don't work, well, you don't set up a committee or commission or a study to figure out what to do next. You figure out how to pivot and move forward. And I think nowhere is that going to be more apropos than in how to deal with housing in our community. So I think we need to work with the public and private sector with 180 Place, but you also have one of the largest apartment builders in the world here, just down the street. And they have really interesting policies when it comes to experience in building workforce housing all over the world. So why don't we work with them, figure out best practices? I think they would love to be supportive of our community in that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can't rely upon big development to create a pathway forward for affordable housing here in Charleston. As the only candidate on this stage that's taking on big development in the state court system, I maintain that. And again, the discussion of public-private partnership, collaborating with other entities, it means that we're subverting democracy. We need truly democratic solutions that include public input, that have people help craft the solutions for their communities. We don't need to defer and kick this down the road for a developer to craft the solution. That's the problem here. It seems like when it comes to a hotel, we find the urgency, we find the funds, we find the means, the cranes go up. But when it comes to affordable housing, we're hand-wringing and we're clutching our pearls. It's a statement of priorities. We need leadership that actually prioritizes affordable housing for everyone. And please, let's stop with trying to subvert democracy and make sure that people are at the center of those solutions, not billionaire developers.
Thank you.
I am so grateful to live in this country. I grew up with my mother and my grandmother, and we were poor, yet we still had a home, and we had food, and we had clothing, and I'm so grateful for that. And my mom worked right down the street at the Veterans Administration Hospital from the time I was little until I was an adult. I love our city. I love Charleston. I love that we're different, and I want us to maintain this difference. This idea of having everyone to have a home is so necessary, is so important, and is part of who we are as Americans. And I will provide that opportunity for everyone to share in that. I will welcome people to the table and listen to them. I've been discriminated against because of my sex and because of my skin color. I know what it's like to not be seen. And as mayor, I will see everyone, and I will listen to what they have. I will invite these innovative ideas and invite these partnerships to help everyone.
Thank you.
I need your vote.
Well, thank you again for this opportunity. And all of this is personal for me because, again, I'm from here. Grandmama grew up on Harris Street, grew up in Bayside Manor. People say nothing good can come out of Bayside Manor. Our people are our greatest asset. And as I said earlier, I'm not going to do anything. I would do everything, in fact, in my power not to leave any neighborhood, community, or resident behind. That includes those without a permanent address. The experience that I have working at every level of government, in particular on homelessness and housing, I will bring that experience. I'll bring those relationships. I will bring the practical lines of effort. Here are the non-sexy things we must do. Here's how we're going to communicate in and out of season for our seniors, for our youth, for those yet born, and those in the middle. We have to do these things, all of these things, all the time. And as mayor, I will be very practical in getting those things done.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you all this morning, but even more importantly, thank you for the opportunity of shining a very bright light on this particular and very sensitive issue. When we got the invitation and then the 15 questions that were posed to us, I had to take a step back and read those questions over. And I'll be very honest with you, and I think that this is a character trait of mine, that I don't have all the answers. And if anybody at this table is telling you they have all the answers, they're fooling themselves and they're fooling you. This is an issue that needs to have a bright spotlight on to address. Awareness of this issue needs to be addressed more thoroughly and more openly, and we can't sweep this under the rug. And we've been doing that, quite frankly, for the past several years. So I hope I have learned a lot from this. I hope that you have learned a lot from this exercise, and I hope that whoever becomes mayor on November the 7th takes the issues and the answers that we have provided to you to move forward with this particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Forrest, and everyone. I've taken a hands-on approach. It's rooted in my lifetime experience of leading crisis ministry decades ago to becoming mayor and dealing with Tent City and helping hundreds and hundreds of folks find housing. We're blessed, y'all. We do a point-in-time count for our whole community, and it's hundreds. It's not thousands. You can go to other cities where it's thousands upon thousands. We can address helping hundreds of people find a place to live and help them with their immediate needs. Remember that zero homelessness isn't the fact that nobody's ever going to be homeless, but we have the resources in place, the structure to help them. That's why we're also blessed that we have such a philanthropic community and citizens and organizations like 180 Place. But I believe that city government has to play a proactive role. And that's why we coordinate. That's why we have the Mayor's Council on Homelessness. That's why we opened the Hope Center. That's why we need a permanent Hope Center. Everybody's not going to come to 180 Place. There are other needs out there that we'll address and will continue, and I'll continue to do that as your mayor.
Thank you, and many thanks again to all of you. If my math is correct, we have 33 days to continue this conversation, but we do need to end this particular forum at this point. So please join me in thanking 180 Place for being such a wonderful host and for all of you for being here. In media training, the mics are always on, but I think at this point the cameras are off, right? So at least the cameras are off. If I could ask one thing quickly, if we could get all of the candidates in the back of the room at the step and repeat, we'd like to do a quick photo. If folks could clear some space, but we want to open up some more informal conversation right after that picture and photo op, if you don't mind.